The Heritage Leadership Forum in Atlanta wasn't known for surprises. It was the usual mix of speeches, applause breaks, and political theater. But this year, there was a new energy in the air. Two names on the schedule made it different: J.D. Vance and Denzel Washington. One a sitting senator with a best-selling memoir turned policy crusade. The other, a legendary actor whose recent civic speeches had stirred conversations far outside Hollywood. The event organizers had tried to keep them apart, different time slots, different stages. But the crowd buzzed with speculation. Would they cross paths? Vance's slot came first. The ballroom was full. Camera crews adjusted angles. The lights were hot, and the atmosphere crackled with anticipation. His speech was titled "Fathers, Families, and the Future of America." He stepped to the podium, confident and deliberate. "I come from a place," he began, "where broken homes were more common than Sunday dinners." He spoke of absent fathers, of moral decay, of how America had lost its backbone when men stopped leading their families. He quoted scripture, his own book, and stats from think tanks that drew sharp lines between poverty and fatherlessness. But the real jolt came 10 minutes in. "Hollywood loves to romanticize struggle," Vance said, pacing. "They make movies about pain, but they never live it. They sell trauma, but they don't rebuild what was broken. And worst of all, they preach from stages built far away from the neighborhoods they abandoned." A few claps. Some knowing nods. Then, almost like it was scripted, a door near the side of the stage opened. Quiet at first. A shadow moved. Then a figure stepped into view. Crisp black suit. No entourage. Just presence. Denzel Washington. He didn't head to the stage. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, arms folded, eyes fixed on Vance. The audience turned. Phones went up. Vance hesitated for the briefest moment, then continued. "I respect anyone who overcomes," he said, voice tightening, "but don't come preaching to America about fathers if yours was never there and you still made millions pretending to be one." Gasps. Audible now. Not everyone knew Denzel's backstory, but enough did. The tension snapped like a cable pulled too tight. Denzel didn't move. But his jaw clenched. He had heard enough. And this was no longer Vance's monologue. It was the beginning of a confrontation no one could ignore. The silence after Vance's last line lingered like fog. He scanned the crowd, expecting applause, but what he got was hesitation. Uneasy glances. Flickering camera lights. And still, Denzel stood there, motionless. A living contradiction to everything just spoken. Then, he moved. Denzel didn't storm the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He simply walked, slow and steady, down the center aisle. The crowd parted like water around a stone. Security shifted in their seats, unsure whether to stand or stay seated. Nobody had expected this. When he reached the edge of the stage, Denzel didn't look up at Vance. He turned to the audience instead. His voice, when it came, was low but resonant, cutting through the air like a chisel. "You talk about fathers like they're all either heroes or failures," he said, calm but sharp. "But let me tell you something. There are men who had no fathers and still learned how to stand. And there are men who had two and still never learned how to listen." The room froze. Vance straightened at the podium, his smirk fading. "I didn't grow up with luxury," Denzel continued. "Not with scripts. Not with spotlights. I grew up in South Bronx. And every day I saw strength in men who were doing their best, with broken tools, no instruction, and no spotlight to tell their story." Somewhere in the back, a man muttered, "Let him speak." Others nodded. Vance crossed his arms now, visibly uncomfortable. "Look," he interjected, "I'm not attacking you personally." Denzel cut in, still calm. "You used my life as a punchline." A murmur ran through the room. "I've played fathers," Denzel said, "yes. But I've also been one. In real life. Off-screen. And you don't get to question someone's manhood just because it doesn't look like your version of American family values. The camera feed cut to a wide shot. Piers Morgan was backstage, watching the live stream with his producers, already whispering, "We need him on air tonight." Vance tried to reclaim the floor. "I was making a broader point about cultural decay. And I'm making a sharper point," Denzel said, stepping just 1 foot onto the stage now, "about responsibility. You can't build unity by blaming the broken." The audience erupted. Not in chaos, but in clarity. This wasn't just a response. It was a reckoning. The applause that followed wasn't wild or theatrical. It was deliberate. Like people were clapping not just for a man, but for something they hadn't heard in a while: honesty without venom. J.D. Vance leaned slightly away from the podium, his hand gripping the edge. He looked out at the crowd, searching for an opening to regain momentum. But the moment had shifted. Denzel had reset the atmosphere. Denzel turned, pacing gently, still not quite on stage, still speaking like a man in a living room, not a debate hall. "I've seen more pain in the eyes of teenage boys than most men see in a lifetime," he said, locking eyes with a woman in the third row. "Not because they failed, but because the world told them they were born failing." Somewhere near the media section, a camera operator mouthed, "Damn. You don't lift people by naming their weakness and walking away," Denzel said, his voice warming. "You lift them by seeing the strength it took just to show up." Vance broke his silence, leaning into the mic again. "So we're just supposed to ignore the consequences of fatherlessness?" he asked. "Just pretend it's not the root of half our problems?" Denzel turned fully to him now. "No," he said. "But we're supposed to address it without shame. A beat. You can't shame the wounded and expect them to stand up stronger." Vance blinked. He looked, for a moment, not like a senator, but like a man realizing he had just stepped into deeper water than he'd planned. "I'm not your enemy," Denzel added. "But I won't let you rewrite the pain of millions just to tighten a narrative." The audience was silent again, but it wasn't discomfort this time. It was listening. One young man, hoodie and all, near the side wall, whispered, "He's not playing politics. He's telling the truth." Vance finally stepped back from the podium, letting out a sharp breath through his nose. "Well," he said, "you're clearly a tough act to follow." Denzel didn't smile. "I'm not here to be an act." He stepped down, nodding once toward the crowd, then toward Vance. "But I'll stay and listen to the rest, if you're ready to talk like men, not headlines." The challenge wasn't in the words, it was in the tone. Real. Grounded. The kind of moment even critics didn't dare interrupt. Piers Morgan, watching from the backstage monitor, snapped his fingers at his assistant. "Get them both. I want this on air by tonight. No edits." Meanwhile, inside the hall, the moderator finally stepped up to the microphone. Her voice wavered slightly as she tried to refocus the room. "Thank you, gentlemen. We'll now move into a brief dialogue segment." But the dialogue had already begun. Vance, hands clasped now, turned slightly toward Denzel, his tone shifting, less attack, more caution. "I grew up watching your movies," he said. "You've played heroes, leaders, preachers. But what happens when real people take your roles and think that's enough? That watching is the same as living?" Denzel nodded slowly, as if weighing the question rather than dismissing it. "What happens," he said, "is that we start confusing image with truth. And then we elect performances instead of leaders." A few heads turned sharply. Some clapped. Vance blinked. Denzel went on, his voice never rising. "You see, I act for a living. I speak with scripts. But when I'm off that stage, when I'm in my neighborhood, there are no lines. Just real people, real struggle. And real fathers who didn't get book deals, but still showed up." Vance pressed, "And what about the ones who didn't?" "We hold them accountable," Denzel said. "But we don't build a campaign off their backs." That landed. The moderator tried to redirect again. "Let's talk solutions. But Denzel stepped forward, not to overpower her, but to ground the moment. This isn't just about policy, he said, turning to the crowd. It's about how we speak to people who've been told they're broken since birth. It's about not weaponizing their scars. Somewhere near the back, a teenage boy sat straighter. A woman with graying hair dabbed her eye. Vance glanced toward them and then back to Denzel. His voice dropped slightly. You know what scares me most, he said. That we're both saying the same thing, but to different audiences. Denzel looked him straight in the eye. Then maybe it's time we stop playing to the crowd, and start talking to the country. The room didn't erupt. It stilled. Because sometimes, silence says more than applause ever could. The moderator, sensing the gravity of the moment, stepped back. For once, her job wasn't to steer the conversation, it was to let it breathe. Denzel stayed in the same spot, hands relaxed at his sides. No script. No podium. Just presence. What people are tired of, he said, is being talked about like they're not in the room. Like data points. Like case studies. He shifted slightly, addressing not just Vance now, but the entire hall. You think a father's absence is a tragedy? So do I. But what's worse is using that tragedy as a marketing tool, as if brokenness is a punchline. J.D. Vance didn't interrupt this time. He folded his arms and listened, actually listened. Denzel continued, when I was 14, I watched my friend walk home alone every day because his dad was gone and his mom worked 2 jobs. He didn't need pity. He needed someone to believe he wasn't doomed. A hush fell again. The audience wasn't just watching, they were living the moment with him. Vance finally responded, but softer now. I'm not trying to exploit pain, he said. I'm trying to wake people up. To what? Denzel asked. Fear? Guilt? We've had generations of wake-up calls that sounded more like alarms no one wants to hear again. Vance didn't flinch. To responsibility. Denzel nodded. Then let's talk about what responsibility actually looks like. He stepped a little closer, not confrontational, just firm. Responsibility is using your platform to tell the truth without humiliating people who are still climbing out of the very ditch you're pointing at. Cameras zoomed in. Journalists stopped scribbling and just watched. That's the difference, Denzel said. Between giving a speech and taking a stand. He paused. And today, I chose to stand. No music swelled. No dramatic lighting shifted. But the impact was real. And in that stillness, Piers Morgan's voice crackled through the studio earpiece backstage. We've got gold, he whispered. The moderator tried once more to reclaim the structure. We'll open the floor to closing remarks shortly. But the room had already chosen its pace, and it wasn't following her outline. J.D. Vance cleared his throat and looked directly at Denzel. You speak well. But words don't fix neighborhoods. Laws do. Funding does. Action does. Denzel didn't retreat. He nodded thoughtfully. You're right, he said. But words shape what kind of laws get written. They shape who those laws serve. If your rhetoric blames before it builds, you won't get action, you'll get backlash. The line was sharp. Measured. Like a scalpel, not a sword. A small murmur rippled through the crowd. Vance pressed, so what, we just tiptoe around problems now? No, Denzel replied, stepping forward slightly. We walk through them, together. But we don't heal people by humiliating them. His voice grew firmer, not louder. You talk about absent fathers like they're statistics. I've sat across from them in rehab centers. In churches. In prisons. And guess what? Most of them weren't proud, they were ashamed. And shame doesn't reform, it paralyzes. From the third row, a man whispered, that's real. Denzel locked eyes with Vance. If you want to lead this country, speak to the broken with the dignity you'd want if you were in their place. For the first time, Vance didn't respond immediately. His jaw clenched. He looked toward the floor, then back at the crowd. And then he said something rare. "You're right." Gasps weren't loud, but they were there. "I've talked about this issue like it's clean," Vance admitted. "Like it's black and white. But it's not. You reminded me of that." The crowd didn't cheer, they leaned in. Denzel nodded once. "Acknowledging complexity isn't weakness," he said. "It's leadership." The moderator stepped forward cautiously, her voice soft. "If I may. I think we just witnessed the kind of political conversation people crave." Phones went up again, not for drama, but for something more elusive, truth. Just when it seemed the tension had cooled, J.D. Vance's eyes narrowed slightly. Maybe it was pride, maybe reflex, but he stepped back into the heat. "You know," he said, voice harder now, "it's easy to say these things when you've got Hollywood behind you. When people clap no matter what you say." A ripple of discomfort ran through the room. Denzel didn't blink. He turned slowly, facing Vance directly. "You think applause is protection?" he said, low and sharp. "Try walking into rooms where no one wants to hear from you, where your name alone shuts doors. I've done that more times than you've seen cameras." The crowd shifted. Denzel continued. "Let me be clear, my calm isn't weakness. It's discipline. And you don't get discipline from movie sets. You get it from life. From watching your mother hold 2 jobs and still make dinner. From knowing you've got 1 shot to speak, and you'd better make it count." He pointed slightly toward the audience, not with a finger, but with his energy. "These people don't need another firebrand or another book. They need someone who sees them, not someone who surveys them." Vance crossed his arms. "So now I'm the problem?" Denzel stepped forward, this time firm enough that even the moderator didn't dare interrupt. "No," he said. "The problem is the narrative that only one kind of struggle is worth telling. That only certain fathers deserve the mic. That if you fail in silence, you're a tragedy, but if you fail loudly, you're a threat." The crowd was frozen. Then, in the front row, a young black father, maybe 25, cradling a toddler, stood up. Quietly. "I'm one of those fathers," he said. His voice didn't shake. The room turned. He looked at Vance. "I made mistakes. I did time. I'm clean now. I work 2 jobs and I show up. I came here because I wanted to hear about hope. Not just my failures." Silence again. Then Denzel turned back to Vance. "You want to change the country? Start by respecting the people who are already doing the work without applause." The studio remained hushed, not out of discomfort, but out of reverence. The tone had shifted, not toward agreement, but toward something deeper, reckoning. J.D. Vance finally stepped forward again, but his voice was different now. Less defensive, more searching. "You said something earlier," he began, looking at Denzel. "About discipline, about showing up, and I can't ignore that." He glanced down for a moment, then back up. "My father left when I was 12. I talk about that in my book. But what I've never said on TV, what I barely admit to myself, is that when I think about him, I don't just feel angry. I feel afraid. Afraid I'm still reacting to that boy inside me." The confession hit the room like thunder in silence. Denzel didn't gloat. He nodded with grace. "That's honesty. That's what changes things." The moderator took a small step back. This wasn't a debate anymore, it was something far more human. Vance continued, "But here's where I struggle, if I let go of the anger, what's left to fight with?" Denzel turned fully toward him. "Reflection," he said. "Anger screams, but reflection sees. A mic can't replace a mirror," JD. He motioned to the audience. Half of this country is shouting, hoping someone will validate their pain. The other half is shouting so no one hears their shame. Both sides need to stop shouting long enough to look in the mirror. A single clap echoed in the studio. Then another. Vance took a breath. And if we don't? Denzel stepped forward. Then our kids grow up thinking empathy is weakness. That listening means losing. And they'll inherit not just our words, but our wounds. A visible chill moved through the room. Even the lights felt softer now. The moderator wiped her eye discreetly. I don't know what to say. Denzel looked at her, then at the camera again. Then maybe, he said, for once, we let the silence speak. The silence lingered, not as a gap to be filled, but as a presence to be honored. The audience sat in a rare stillness, their attention glued not to a winner, but to a wound that had just been named. Then, softly, the moderator closed her notes and stepped aside. We came here expecting a debate, she said. But I think we all just witnessed something different. Maybe even something necessary. Denzel took a final breath and nodded. Vance looked around the room, his defenses no longer his armor but something he had just dropped, on purpose. He walked over, slowly, extending his hand. Denzel didn't hesitate. He took it. That handshake didn't spark thunderous applause. It triggered something quieter. Something deeper. The sound of a collective inhale. Of people realizing that vulnerability can exist between rivals, and that truth doesn't always come with a cheer. Then someone in the crowd stood. A woman in her 60s, hand over her heart. I didn't come here to like either of you, she said plainly. But I'm leaving respecting both. Her words broke the spell. Applause rose, not roaring, but honest. Scattered claps growing like a ripple that refused to be forced, just felt. Later that evening, the clip surfaced on every platform. Not because it was explosive, but because it was different. A moment where two men didn't try to out-yell each other, but out-reveal each other. The headlines varied. Not a debate, a dialogue. Denzel and Vance show America another way. No shouting, just substance. The clip hit 1 million views in under 4 hours. At a gas station in Ohio, a cashier watched the footage on her break. I wish my dad could have seen that, she whispered. In a school in Birmingham, a teacher played it in her civics class, telling her students, this is what accountability looks like. And in a quiet kitchen in Kentucky, J.D. Vance's mother rewatched the handshake frame by frame, her eyes misty. That's growth, baby, she said softly to no one. Meanwhile, Denzel sat back in his home office, the lights low, his phone lighting up non-stop. Ruben walked in. They want you on CNN. And PBS. And Colbert. Everyone. Denzel looked up. Let them wait, he said. Why? Because if we rush this moment, it becomes a clip. But if we let it breathe, it might become change. He turned off the screen. The night was quiet again. But somewhere, across the country, a new conversation had already begun. What we just witnessed wasn't about left or right. It was about what happens when two men drop their shields and speak truth, not for applause, but for impact. If this moment moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who still believes that change begins with listening. We're not here for noise, we're here for meaning. See you in the next one.